My name is Cathryn. I work for the Bat Conservation Trust as a project officer for Species on the Edge, which I'm sure you all know is a 4-year partnership tackling biodiversity loss in Scotland. One of the ways that we are doing that is to provide lots of free training events and opportunities to enable people to connect with their natural heritage and get involved in helping to conserve it. So tonight's workshop, we will introduce you to the world of bats and BCT's citizen science programme, the National Bat Monitoring Programme. So hopefully by the end of tonight's workshop, you should all agree that bats are pretty cool, if you don't already think so, and you'll also know how you can get involved in helping to conserve them. This session is designed to give you a taster of the different ways in which we collect information on bat populations and give you some of the fundamental skills that will enable you to have a go at identifying bats and carry out a beginner-level bat survey to discover your local bats. There are 2 more workshops planned over the next couple of months that will build on what we cover this evening so that you can develop your skills even further if you would like to. So the objectives tonight are to familiarise you with the world of bats, generally. Then we'll go into a bit more detail and explore some of our British bat species. I'll introduce you to the National Bat Monitoring Programme and invite you to take part whatever your skill level. I'll also share some tips with you for spotting bats. There will also be a couple of short quizzes as well tonight, nothing to worry about, but yeah, just to check that you're all paying attention, basically. So we'll start globally. We'll talk about bats in general before focusing on some of our UK bat species. The bat in the picture here is the common tent-making bat, which is found in Central and South America. And this species creates a roost within a leaf. It bites through the midrib of the leaf, causing it to fold in half like a wee tent. And a roost is anywhere that a bat lives. So it could be in trees or buildings or caves, or in this case, leaves. Yeah. Before we go any further, I will bust a few myths. You've probably all heard the expression blind as a bat. Well, bats are not blind at all, actually. They've got pretty good vision, similar to our own. So I'm not quite sure where that saying came from, but it's not true. Bats won't get stuck in your hair. So people are often worried that bats are attacking them. Some species sort of like to fly around us, fly at our faces and things. So people are often concerned that they're going to get stuck in their hair. But if a bat, our bats can see tiny little insects in the dark, so they're not going to not see us. And provided you're not waving your hair around, then the bats really shouldn't get stuck in your hair. I have met a girl who said that she was bouncing on a trampoline in her back garden when she was a child, and she did get a bat stuck in her hair. But I think that was more a case of the hair getting stuck in the bat than the bat getting stuck in the hair. So it's very unlikely that you're going to get a bat stuck in your hair. Bats don't make nests or chew wires. They're not rodents. They're not like rodents at all. So many of us will have bats living in our houses and we might never know that they're there. So they're not causing any damage to your property in the way that rodents might. There are vampire bats in the world, but only 3 species out of many hundreds. And they're not like the vampire bats in the movies. They're not going to suck your blood dry. These bats live in Central and South America. They tend to feed on sort of livestock, so they're quite small little bats. They'll land on the rump of a cow, for example, make a little incision and lap up about a teaspoon of blood, and then fly off. And generally speaking, the animal is none the wiser. So there are vampire bats, but they're not like you see in the movies. So what are bats? Well, they're mammals like us. They have hair, they give birth to live young, and they suckle their young on milk. They generally have 1 pup a year. So they're not breeding in the same way as rodents either. So you don't have to be concerned if you've got bats that they're going to be multiplying. So yeah, they're mammals like us. And actually they make up about 20% of mammal species on the planet. There are over 1,400 species worldwide, with new species still being discovered today. And they range from the tiny bumblebee bat of Western Thailand, which is about the size of a bumblebee. It weighs about 2 grams, has a wingspan of about 17 centimeters, all the way up to the golden cap fruit bats of the Philippines, which can weigh about 1 kilogram and have a wingspan of up to about 2 meters. So from a bumblebee to a white-tailed eagle and everything in between. They're found everywhere on the planet, really, apart from a few isolated oceanic islands and the poles. We find them on every continent except the Antarctic. We even have one species, the northern bat, which is hardy enough to live in the Arctic. They've evolved to exploit many ecological niches and sources of food. And bats around the world eat all kinds of things, from fruit and flowers to small mammals and fish. And we even have the 3 species of vampire bat that I mentioned earlier. But the vast majority of all bat species, including all those that we have in the UK, are feeding on insects. Bats can have an incredibly long lifespan for their size. Bats tend to live about 10 times as long as a mouse or a shrew of similar size. And the record age for a bat is a Brandt's bat, which reached at least 41 years old. And this is a tiny little bat with a body about the same size as your thumb and a wingspan of up to about 25 centimeters. So it's incredibly long lifespan for a tiny little mammal like that. They're also very, very intelligent and social creatures. And scientists taking part in bat ringing studies have often found the same unrelated bats hanging out together. So they've got friends and they like to hang out. The bat in the picture here is a beautiful painted bat found in several countries across Asia. And we believe that the pattern is a form of camouflage, which allows the bat to blend in with dry leaves and flowers while they're roosting. So bats are mammals, but they're unique amongst mammals. They're the only mammals that have mastered the power of flight. And this has helped to contribute to their widespread distribution around the globe. They've also been around for a really long time. Bats evolved into a clearly separate group about 65 million years ago, and we have fossils of bats that look very similar to the bats we see today that are over 50 million years old. So that suggests that bats have probably been around since dinosaurs roamed the earth. All bats belong to the order Chiroptera, which comes from the Greek and means hand-wing. So chiro is hand and ptera is wing. And their wings are formed from elongated finger bones. So like us, bats have 4 fingers and a thumb. The difference is that their fingers are as long as their bodies, and they have a wing membrane stretched between them. If I was a bat and I stretched out my arms, my fingers would reach almost to the ground, and I'd have a wingspan of about 12 foot based on my height. So because it's their fingers that are making up the structure of their wings, they have incredibly maneuverable flight. They're really skillful flyers. And this sort of paired with the length of time that they've been around has really enabled them to distribute around the world. So earlier we mentioned that bats are not blind. They have pretty good vision, but they're often hunting tiny insects in the dark. So they've evolved another way to see, which enables them to pick out finer details. Many species of bat, including all those that we have in the UK, use echolocation for navigating and detecting prey in the dark. So they're basically flying around shouting, and they're listening for those returning echoes, which they use to build a sonic picture of the world around them. So the majority of bat calls, so our hearing goes up to about 20 kilohertz, but bats are calling from around about 20 kilohertz all the way up to 200 kilohertz. So the vast majority of the sounds are too high pitched for us to hear, which is a good thing because some bats are echolocating really loudly. The bat in this picture here is a noctule, which is our biggest bat. And their echolocation calls can be as loud as twice the legal limit for a nightclub, which is pretty amazing. So the bats are shouting out, sending out ultrasonic waves into the air. If those sound waves hit an object, they're bouncing back, and the bat's using those echoes to build a sound map of the world around them. So we use bat detectors to convert the sounds that the bats are making into sounds that we can hear. And this can help us to identify different species and behaviours. Different species of bat have different call characteristics. There are many different types of bat detector. Prices range from about £60. And you don't need one to carry out a bat survey. Some of our couple of our beginner surveys, it's not essential to have a bat detector at all. So we have various different kinds. So the heterodyne bat detector in the picture there, these are sort of generally the ones that people start with. And these are tunable detectors. They're pretty simple to use, they're quite cheap. And with a bit of practice, you can start to identify some of our different species. We also have time expansion and frequency division. And these are designed more for taking high quality recordings out in the field, which you're later going to analyze with computer software. So this is a more advanced identification approach. So it's just to give you a bit of a flavor of what you can do. These days, we also have full spectrum bat recorders, which are kind of the best of both worlds, really. These are listening to all the bats across a range of frequencies. These ones you can hear bats in the field, but you can also take high quality recordings as well. So this next slide, this is more advanced than we're going to cover tonight, but it's just to give you a bit of an idea of some of the things that we can do. This is a recording of an enthusiast pipistrelle from a time expansion detector, and it's viewed using sound analysis software. So using this software, we can take quite precise measurements and everything, which can help us to identify which species produce these calls. You can also listen to the bat calls slowed down 10 times, which we'll do in a minute. So when you're looking at this, basically the axis along the bottom is representing time, and this is 1.4 seconds of recording. Up the left-hand side is the frequency, and the kind of chirps in the middle, the high-pitched ones, they're happening about 40 kilohertz. So I'm just going to play this to you. Yeah, this is an enthusiast pipistrelle serenading a female. So those high-pitched chirps we were hearing, those are the echolocation calls that the bat's emitting. And you can see here there's about 8 or 9 calls in a second. So they're echolocating at quite a fast rate, varies between species. Those beautiful sort of upward trills that you can hear, those are the bat communicating to other bats. So we call those social calls. And we scientists have kind of looked at this a little bit, and they have unpicked it. And they're pretty confident that this is an enthusiast pipistrelle trying to encourage a female enthusiast pipistrelle to come and mate with him. So, but it's the echolocation calls that we use when we're bat detecting to identify different species. But yeah, back to tunable heterodyne detectors. So these are the ones that we generally start with. If I go out and take a public bat walk, it's heterodyne detectors that we use. These are really rewarding. They're really simple to use, and you can point the detector at a bat and listen to that bat as it flies around. So they're really nice for engaging people and getting started in your bat monitoring journey. So these are converting ultrasonic sounds into sounds that we can hear, which are going to sound like smacks, clicks, chips, chops, or warbles, depending on the species. We do have another couple of workshops planned, which is going to go into more detail on how to recognize the different sounds and identify the different species. But in this session, we're simply going to we're going to familiarize you with the sounds and let you know the correct tunings for each species. So this is just going to help you become familiar with a range of sounds. So we can tell species apart using 2 things. The sound characteristics, so what does the sound sound like? Different species have different sound characteristics. And then we also look at the repetition rate of the calls, so how many times that bat is calling per second. And I'm just going to give you some examples of our different species now. So that's a pipistrelle. We describe that sound as smacks or slaps. It's often described as quite a wet sound, and the repetition rate is quite fast. That would be one of our myotis bats. That sound we often describe as clicks or ticks, dry clicks or ticks. and it's got a very fast repetition rate. So myotis bats tend to echolocate at about 15 or 16 pulses per second. So that sound is from one of our bigger bats, possibly a iNaturalist. And we describe that sound as chip-chop. You can often hear the difference in pitch between the echolocation calls, and it's quite a slow repetition rate. And then finally, we call this warbles. It sounds very alien, but it's a really cool sound. These are produced by the horseshoe bats, which we don't have those in Scotland, but we do have 2 species of horseshoe bat found in England and Wales. So they make that really amazing and unique warbling sound. We can tell species apart using 2 things as well. We can tune into the frequency. Some species have a peak frequency that we can tune into, which can help us. So bat calls span a range of frequencies. Different species echolocate at different frequencies. Some do have a peak frequency, as I mentioned. We'll talk a wee bit more about that. I'm going to play this clip to you now, and I want you to listen to how the sound changes as they scroll through the dial on the bat detector. So the dial in the picture there is the frequency dial. So as you're looking at a bat, you point your bat detector at the bats, and you want to tune around with your bat detector until you find that deepest sound that you can hear. So the peak frequency is where the call sounds its deepest. So have a listen and see if you can hear how the pitch of the sound changes. And then when we find the deepest sound, the number on the screen will represent the peak frequency of the bat, and that can help us to identify different species too. So we'll go over this a bit more as we go through, but hopefully you could all hear that that sound changed as we scrolled through the frequencies. If you can see the bat as well, visual clues are really important in helping us to identify different species. Things like what the bat looks like, what is its outline, what's the flight pattern like, what habitat are you in? These can all be really important clues in helping you to identify different species. Are there any questions so far, Cloudy?
I can't see any questions in the chat. Just a reminder, if you do have any questions, put them in the chat and we'll look at them regularly.
Okay. I'll just crack on. Right now, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the bats that we find in Britain and then Scotland as well. So we'll just go through a bit of a top trumps to start with. Largest versus smallest. Our largest bat is the noctule. This is a big bat. I've never met a noctule, but I've been told it's like having a handful of bats in your hand. The body is about the size of the palm of your hand. They have a wingspan of up to around 45 centimeters, so a pretty big bat. These guys, they often come out before sunset, so you might see them before sunset. And some people can hear these bats without a bat detector. If you've got really good hearing, you might be able to just pick up the bottom end of these bats calling. But yeah, a big bat weighs about 40 grams, a handful of bat, with a wingspan of up to about 45 centimeters. So the noctule, our biggest bat. Our smallest bat is the soprano pipistrelle. Tiny little bat, smaller than your thumb, with a wingspan of up to about 25 centimeters. These guys are actually the most common species in Scotland as well. We don't find them in the extremities of Scotland, but if you're in the central or southern parts of Scotland, this is very likely to be the bat that you're most familiar with. We didn't actually realise it was its own species until the 1990s. We thought we only had 1 species of Pipistrelle. Now we know we have 3 actually. Most common versus most rare. So the UK's most common bat is the common Pipistrelle. There's a population of almost 2 million. These guys are the most widespread species as well. So the bat that you're likely to see up in Orkney or out in the Outer Isles. So although the soprano pipistrelle, it's very closely related, is the most common bat in Scotland, common pipistrelles are most widespread. So depending on where you are in the country, it's going to be one or both of these species that you're most familiar with. Our rarest bat is the greater mouse-eared bat. We don't have these in Scotland. It says here population of 1, but now there's I think 3 or 4 individuals that we know of. So these guys used to breed in the UK, and they went extinct in the 90s. And then one individual showed up in the early 2000s, and he was the only individual we knew of for about 20 years. And in the last few years, a few more individuals have been found as well. So possible that this is making a bit of a comeback, which is pretty exciting. Yeah, something I didn't say, which maybe is a clue, it might be in the quiz. The common pipistrelle is the bat that you're most likely to find in your garden. So it might be a quiz question. Cutest versus strangest. The brown long-eared bat is often described as the pin-up girl of the bat world. It's a really cute little bat with a lovely little face and huge big ears. These guys can apparently hear insects walking on vegetation. They are really cute. I spend a lot of time looking for them and not very much time finding them. They're quite elusive. They're pretty widespread across the country. We get them, we have them on Skye. They're probably quite widespread in Scotland, although records are pretty scarce because they are very difficult to find. They're very quiet and they're very shy bats. They tend to stay within woodlands. They tend to come out well after dark. So they're an under-recorded species, but very, very cute. The strangest is probably the greater horseshoe bat. This is one of the bats that produces that amazing warbling sound that we heard earlier. Most bats use their throats and their voice box to echolocate, but the horseshoe bats are echolocating through their noses. So that weird shape, that nose leaf that it's got on its face there, that's being used to produce the echolocation calls. So these guys are quite weird looking. And the horseshoe bats are the ones a little bit more like bats in the movies. They have the big wings that wrap all the way around their bodies. I still think they're quite cute. Plus many more. So in the UK, we have 17 breeding species. In Scotland, we have at least 9. And some species are starting to show signs of recovery. So there's evidence that bat populations have suffered really serious declines over the last 100 years or so. But our monitoring shows that some species are showing signs of recovery, although we think these are recovering from all-time low population levels. So although they are recovering, they're still nowhere near recovered to historic levels. Some species are not yet showing signs of recovery. So the Daubenton's bat is one of the species on the edge target species. Again, we do find these in Scotland, but they're quite hard to come across on the west coast. There's a few records. I believe they're on Skye, but I'm yet to really confirm that. But yeah, these guys are not showing signs of recovery, although I think that their range is possibly extending, which is interesting. For some species, we don't know how they're doing. Some are much trickier to survey than others, but we're constantly developing new technologies and new methods of monitoring these rarer and more difficult to identify species. So we need regular data every year to help us monitor these trends. And that is where you come in. Do we have any questions yet, Claudia, or will I just crack on?
No questions yet. Oh, there is one question that just popped in.
Okay.
It is it not surprising that bats are recovering with decline of insects?
I don't know that it's surprising. I mean, maybe you can help with that, Cloudy. They're possibly, there's a lot of work being done to help the recovery of species like the lesser horseshoe bat. So the fact that their populations are recovering is probably related to the fact that a lot of work has been done to try and support them. I think probably the decline in bat populations is linked to the decline in insects, but it's also, I think research has shown that it's pretty closely related to deforestation after the war as well. So we lost a lot of our woodlands, and I think that was what really caused the serious declines. But certainly the lack of insects is not helping them at all. Claudia, would you have anything else to add to that?
No, just I think the decline of insects is a little bit more complicated in terms that some groups of insects are declining, others not so much. So it depends a little bit which groups the species are feeding on as well, I assume. But yeah, otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any shortage of midges in Scotland, which is what many of our species are eating. So yeah, the decline in insects doesn't seem to have had an impact on midges. But yeah, so the National Bat Monitoring Programme was set up by the Bat Conservation Trust to gather data on bat populations from all over the UK. So we have volunteers all over the UK. Unfortunately, though, uptake in Scotland is pretty poor. We are lagging behind the rest of the UK in our contribution to the NBMP. In Ireland, 37% of sites have been allocated to volunteers. In Scotland, we have less than 7% of NBMP sites allocated to volunteers. So we're really hoping that through Species on the Edge, we can encourage more people to sign up to the National Bat Monitoring Programme, because we have huge gaps in our data, particularly around the west coast of Scotland, the north coast of Scotland, all our islands, really poorly represented. So we really want people to get involved and help us to understand our bat species. So the NBMP, the National Bat Monitoring Programme, has been running since 1996. I think we've had over 3,600 volunteers who have helped us to survey over 6,000 sites across the UK. And everyone can take part. It doesn't matter what your skill levels are. We have 4 summer surveys to choose from, and they range in sort of difficulty. So you can certainly have a go at the beginner surveys without any knowledge or experience. And your accounts will help bat conservation. So the data that you gather will go into a national database, which is going to be used to produce population trends, which can then help us to do all kinds of things, inform policy, understand better how we can help to conserve them. So the summer surveys are the sunset survey, the roost count, the waterway survey, and the field survey. So the sunset survey is the sort of entry-level one. It's the one I would really encourage you all to have a go at. It runs from April till October. So all the bats in the UK generally hibernate in the winter. We don't have a lot of insects around in the winter, so most of our bats will be hibernating through the coldest months. By April, most bats are pretty active. So survey season generally starts April till October. So you can do a sunset survey. You could do one sunset survey, or you could do a sunset survey a week from April to October, whatever you fancy. It's a beginner level survey, no experience required. You don't need a bat detector. You don't need to be able to identify bats. You're just simply spending an hour at sunset looking for bats and other wildlife. You can try and ID them if you can, but it's absolutely not necessary. If you're more of a lark than an owl, you can do the sunrise survey instead. So you either start at sunset and sit for an hour, or you sit for an hour and end at sunrise. So bats are most active at dawn and dusk. So it's the best time to see them, and it's much easier to see them when there's a bit of light in the sky, when you can see them silhouetted against the sky. It's quite hard to see bats in the dark. If you have a bat roost, or you know of a bat roost nearby, you can carry out a roost count. You're simply counting bats emerging at dusk. Again, this one's suitable for beginners. You don't need to know what species of bat. You just need to be able to count them as they come out of the roost. Our next survey is the waterway survey. It does require a bat detector and a little bit more experience. I would say don't be put off from having a go. I've done loads of waterway surveys, and my first few waterway surveys I did before I joined the Bat Conservation Trust. And most of them just said bats. I had no idea what kind of bats I was looking at, but it's a good way to get experience, to just go out and have a go. When you're filling in the form with your data, they ask for information about you as well, to ask what your experience level is, how many bat surveys you've carried out before, so they can kind of gauge the information you're giving them against your experience level and your location. So don't worry about, you don't have to be really confident. I would encourage you to just give it a go and just be honest. It's always better to be honest and say you saw a bat, but you don't know what kind, than to guess and say it was the wrong species, basically. So for the waterway survey, we have predetermined grid squares all over the UK. And when you sign up to this, you'll have a look at the map. You'll find a grid square near you. And then you'll set up a route along that waterway. So it's roughly a kilometre route, and you stop at roughly 100-metre intervals along the route, and you are listening for Daubenton's bat passes. And a bat pass is just simply echolocation calls passing your bat detector. So we don't try and count the number of bats, because it's very hard to tell whether it's one bat going around in circles or 50 bats going past your bat detector. So we count the number of passes. And this one is specifically aimed at Daubenton's bats. And then finally, we've got the field survey. Again, this one requires a bat detector and a wee bit more experience. So this time we're looking for multiple species. Again, you get an allocated grid square near you. You set up a roughly triangular route within that grid square. And then we walk, I think it's roughly about 100 metres. And while we're walking, we're tuning our bat detectors to about, I think, 25 kilohertz, and we're listening for our big bats. So in Scotland, we'd be listening for noctules and lislers. So the bats that we heard with the slow chip chops earlier on, we'd be listening for those while we're walking and counting the number of bat passes. And then we're stopping at regular intervals. We're retuning our bat detector to about 50 kilohertz, and we're listening for Pipistrelles. So we could be, if you're feeling confident, you can try and identify different Pipistrelles. So we have three species of Pipistrelle in Scotland. You don't have to be able to identify down to species level. If you're not confident, you could just record that you've counted Pipistrelles. So you don't have to say which species of Pipistrelle it is. Same for the noctule or the lislers. You don't have to be able to differentiate between the two to take part in the survey. You could just say that it was a big bat. That's good enough information for us. So that's a quick introduction to the different surveys. Are there any questions before we go on to the next slide?
Yes. So one question is, can you do a roost survey on a bed box located on a house? Is it worthwhile if there are just a few beds roosting?
Yeah, definitely worthwhile. So the roost count takes place in June, and we ask you to do 2 visits about 2 weeks apart. If you're able to repeat that survey yearly, that's really valuable information, even if you only have 2 bats in there. You know, if we get that information regularly year on year, that can really help to give us an idea of how bats in your area are doing. So yeah, even if there's only a couple of bats, absolutely worth doing if you have a roost that you know of. Yeah.
Another question is, we have a bed roost in our roof. We counted 166 emerging during one evening. Last year we saw at least 3 emerging and flying during the morning about 11 o'clock. Why would they emerge during a summer's day when they can be mobbed by birds?
It can be various reasons. They were maybe hungry and they were just driven out by hunger or thirst. Maybe it was too hot in the roost. So they've perhaps come out to cool down a little bit, or maybe they're changing roosts. If it's a maternity roost, it could be baby bats just coming out and having a bit of an adventure and not doing what they're told. So yeah, generally speaking, we don't see bats out in the daytime, but they do come out occasionally. So hunger or thirst can certainly bring them out. If the conditions in the roost have changed, or if yeah, if they want to move to a different roost. So there could be lots of different reasons, really. I think if you've got 166 bats in a roost and 3 of them are out, maybe they just got fed up of all their neighbours, perhaps. Maybe they're just grumpy bats. I think bats have personalities as well, so I don't know for sure. It could be a few reasons. Yeah, sometimes if the weather's been really bad and they're just really hungry, then they don't have a choice. They have to come out and look for food. So yeah, what was the weather like when they were out?
David, do you want to comment on the weather? Do you remember? Sunny, David says.
Yeah, well, I've certainly, when I see bats in the daytime, it tends to be really hot days. So I think that they've come out because they're probably just too hot and they've come out for a drink. But yeah, it could be various reasons. Okay, well, now we're going to move on to a little quiz to see if anybody's been listening at all. You can just pop your answers in the chat. We're not testing anybody. So let's see how we get on. Roughly how many bat species are there worldwide?
There are a few answers coming in. D so far, 1,400. D seems to be
I think the
very
last time
consistent. D.
you're all paying attention. Well done. That's nice. I can't see anybody, so it doesn't feel like anybody's actually there. So it's nice to know you are there and you are listening. I think the actual last count was 1,464, something like that. But it does continue to rise even today. So loads of bats. There we go, 1,400. Well done, everyone. Which British bat are you most likely to find in your garden? I nearly forgot to tell you this one.
So we have the first, there's lots of answers coming in, all C.
Oh, these are fantastic. Well done. It does depend where you live, but it doesn't really matter where you live, to be honest. It's common Pipistrelle that you're probably most likely to have. So yes, well done. How many bat species are breeding in the UK?
People need a little bit of thinking time, but there's some answers coming in. So we've got A, 17, A, it's all A's, it seems.
You are very good. It is 17 species breeding in the UK. We have 18 species resident in the UK, but as far as we know, the greater mouse-eared bat, the one with just a couple of bats down in the very south coast of England, as far as we know, they're not breeding at the moment in the UK. They used to, but not anymore. So yeah, 17. Which is the largest UK bat?
Okay, we slowly got some answers coming in. So far it's B, 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 B. Everybody seems to be thinking B.
Yeah, noctule, our biggest bat. These guys like to eat big juicy moths and beetles. And these are the ones that are shouting louder than a nightclub. And yeah, noctule. Okay, that was it. Well done, everyone. I think that was 100%. Good effort. Okay, starting your bat surveying. So yeah, the Sunset Survey, it's a fantastic place to start. I would really encourage you all. Obviously, February is not a great time for bat surveys, but if the weather's good in March, if we get some warm sunny evenings and the insects are starting to fly, it's definitely worth keeping an eye out. You may well see some bats. I don't know if you'll be able to enter your data for the Sunset Survey. It doesn't officially start till April, but it's good to get out and get a bit of practice and just have a look. You can always submit your records via iRecord or somewhere else. But yeah, the Sunset Survey is a fantastic place to start. Don't need any skills, no bat detector. You can do it you don't even have to leave your home. You can sit inside and look out the window if that works for you, or you could do it from a balcony, your garden, your local green space, wherever you are happy to sit for an hour on a warm summer's evening. And if you're happy to repeat it several times, that's even better. The more data we can get from the same place repeated, the better for our population trends. So where can you find bats? So in rural Scotland, I've found bats pretty much everywhere I've looked. We have bats in pretty much all of our habitats, so urban, wetlands, forests, you know, pretty much everywhere. So, but gardens are a good place to start, and it means you can have a cup of tea. So it doesn't matter what size your garden is, it's probably going to have some bat activity depending on where you are. So in our gardens, we're almost certainly going to find Pipistrelles. Depending on where you are, it could be one of two species. If you have an enthusiast Pipistrelle, you're really lucky. They're very much rarer than the other two. Our parks are a real magnet for bats, especially in urban areas, and they often have big mature trees and water features, which are great for bats. So you're going to find Pipistrelles in parks. You might also find some of our bigger bats, noctule or liselers in Scotland. If you're in England, or sort of not the north of England, but southern half of England, you might also have serotines. Like I said, water features are great for bats, as they are for a lot of our wildlife. So rivers, streams, wee lochs, where there's water, there's bat food. If there's good riparian habitat, so lots of vegetation around the waterway, that's even better. So you're more chance of seeing more species. The more vegetation there is, the better really for bats. And you're likely to see several different species and high levels of activity around waterways. So all the bats we've mentioned previously, plus you might get an enthusiast pipistrelle as well. So these are actually migratory bats. So they tend to breed up in Russia, northeastern Europe, and then migrate south and west for hibernating in the winter. We do have a resident population in the UK, but it's quite small, so these bats are pretty rare. But they're tiny little bats again, wingspan of up to 25 centimetres. These have been ringed, and I think the longest journey that we know of is over 2,000 kilometres by a tiny little bat. They're incredible. So these guys are quite closely associated with water, as well as the Daubenton's bat. This one's really, it's called the water bat. This bat likes to feed on or just above the surface of the water. So these guys have big hairy feet, and they actually use that to trawl along the surface of the water for insects. So yeah, Daubenton's bat, very much associated with fresh water. Woodland, all of our bats are woodland species, but some are more reliant on woodlands than others. But woodlands offer lots of habitat, foraging habitat, and also roosting potential as well. So species diversity can be really high in woodlands. So all the species that we've mentioned earlier, plus our lovely little brown long-eared bat. So these guys tend to stay pretty close within their woodlands. And the natterer's bat as well, which is a close relation of Daubenton's. But when we mentioned earlier that visual clues are important, these species are a really good example of that. So the natterer's bat and the Daubenton's bat, they're both myotis species. They're really closely related. They sound very similar. They look pretty similar, but they behave quite differently, and they're found typically in quite different habitats. So visual clues, the habitat that you're in, can all be really important in helping to decide which species of bat you're looking at. Open countryside as well. It's more important for some of the species that we find down south, but countryside like cattle pasture can be important, particularly for the horseshoe bats, who kind of specialise in eating dung beetles. So not so much up in Scotland, but certainly down south, that kind of cattle pasture, really important habitats for bats as well. If you're looking for bat roosts, bats roost in all kinds of places. So they like to roost in our homes and our buildings, so churches, bridges, structures like that. They're often found roosting in trees, particularly they can be found in quite small trees, But if you've got big old mature trees with lots of cavities within, that can be really lovely bat roosts. You can also find them in places like log piles and stuff like that. So they do turn up in strange places. You might know you've got bats by finding some droppings. They look quite similar to mouse droppings, but they're glittery, they're sparkly. Bats eat a lot of insects, so their droppings are sparkly. So if you see some sparkly little droppings and you're feeling brave, put a pair of gloves on. If you crush it between your fingers and it crumbles, that's bat poo. So bat droppings are dry and sparkly. So if you find those, that's a good sign that you might have found a roost. They often defecate as they're leaving the roost. So you might find a pile of droppings underneath the sort of entry point to a roost. The couple here in the picture, they're carrying out a roost count. So they've positioned themselves underneath the exit to a roost. It's quite important to get yourself into a position where the bats are silhouetted against the sky. It's much easier to count them if you can see them against the sky. So yeah, doing a roost count, you can sit and have a nice cup of tea while you count bats as they come out of your bat box or your roof. Sort of signs like this on trees can indicate bat roosts. So if a bat roost has been in use for a long time, there can be a bit of a build-up of oils and things where the bats are coming and going. This is right below this sort of hole here, so it could be a bat roost, but also it could just be sort of rot or fungus on the tree. So it's not always a sign of a bat roost, but it can be an indication. So worth keeping an eye out for. This is what bats look like as they're coming out of the roost. So if you were doing a roost count, if you can get yourself into a position where you get this kind of view, it can be really easy to count them. As they emerge from the roost, they tend to just sort of drop out and fly off. They don't really mess around. They just come out and go. So doing a roost count, you would just sit there. You start 20 minutes before sunset. You count the bats as they emerge. You would stop when there's been no bat activity for 10 minutes, or if the weather deteriorates, or if it becomes too dark to see. That would sort of signify the end of your survey. But to carry out a roost count, that's all you're doing. You're sitting under the roost and you're just counting the bats as they come out. If you have a roost, but you're not sure exactly where they're coming and going, if you can face getting up before sunrise, bats often exhibit swarming behaviour before they re-enter the roost at dawn. So it can be easier to sort of pinpoint where they're coming and going because they do a lot more activity right outside the roost exit. So this is what they sort of tend to look like when they're re-entering the roost. So they do a lot more kind of swarming about at the entrance to the roost, and that can help you find where they're coming and going. You wouldn't be able to count them going back in, I don't suppose, because it's quite difficult to keep an eye on individual bats in low light. So on the sunset survey, it's absolutely fine to just record that you've seen bats. You don't have to know which species. And like I said, even if you're sort of feeling like you want to try another more difficult survey, don't be put off by not being confident. Just be honest when you're submitting your data. Just say, I don't know, you know, practice makes perfect. But when we're identifying bats, we can use a few clues. So we can use our eyes. We can look at the flight pattern. So how does that bat fly? What's the outline of the bat? What does it look like? How big is it? We can also use a bat detector. Does it have a peak frequency that we can tune into? Can we turn that dial around? Can we hear the pitch change as we turn the dial? And can we tune into the deepest sound? What sound is it making? Is it a dry click? Or is it a wet slap? Or is it a warble? These things are all clues. Okay, so our Pipistrelle species. Pipistrelles, the bats we're probably almost familiar with. Tiny little bat. They have quite an erratic flight pattern. So these guys are hawking, so they're catching midges in midair and eating them on the wing. They tend to fly in edge habitats, so they like to have trees or a bit of clutter on one side. They prefer it to be a bit more open on the other side. So they're often in and around our gardens, along the edges of woodlands, along hedgerows. They have quite a twisty, turny flight. They're also below the tree canopy, so they're often around about our head height. They have quite long but broad wings. They're only a little bat, but they have quite long and broad wings. They do have a peak frequency, so if you were to see a pipistrelle, you would know with a bit of practice that it was a pipistrelle, but you wouldn't be able to tell which species it was without a bat detector unless you had it in your hand. So I'm just going to play. This is what a correctly tuned detector sounds like for a pipistrelle. So you want that nice, rich, deep sound. So that's the sound you want to hear. If you're hearing this sound, and you've got your detector tuned incorrectly, so you'd want to keep tuning your dial until it sounded like the sound in the first clip. And then when you look at the numbers on the dials, if the numbers are around about 45, it would be a common pipistrelle. If they're around about 55, it would be a soprano pipistrelle. And if they were around about 39, it would be an enthusiast pipistrelle. In reality, they're often echolocating at 50, so you can't know for sure. I have bats that live in my woods that are constantly echolocating at 50 kilohertz, so I can't say for sure whether they're common or soprano pipistrelle. And I have to be honest about that when I'm doing my surveys. I just put them down as pipistrelle, 50 kilohertz. That's all you can do. Don't guess. This is what they look like in flight and sound like. You can see what the different bands there. The tree lines, those little raspberries that you hear, that's a feeding buzz. So that tells us that they've caught an insect, they've locked onto an insect and caught it. But yeah, these are probably, if you've seen bats, it's probably pipistrelles that you've seen. They're a tiny little bat, flying really fast all around sort of head height, backwards and forwards. If you saw that bat, you could be pretty confident it was a pipistrelle. But if you didn't have a bat detector and you tuned into the peak frequency, you couldn't say which species for sure. Daubenton's bat. So it's got a very different flight pattern. So these bats, the flight pattern is really diagnostic. So when we're doing a waterway survey, when we're looking for these bats, we want to be able to see the bats as well as hear them to be really sure that it is a Daubenton's bat. So these guys have a really typical flight pattern. They're flying low, sweeping planes over the surface of the water. And they're a medium-sized bat, so they're a bit bigger than a pipistrelle. And they've got really big, broad wings. These guys will echolocate across quite a wide range of frequencies. They don't have a peak frequency that we can tune into. So tuning around on your bat detector, sound that you're hearing isn't going to change. So this is what Daubenton's bats sound like. So those very rapid clicks. That's also what a natterer's bat would sound like too. But a natterer's bat would behave very differently. So if you could see the bat and it was flying low over the water and you could hear that, you would know it was Daubenton's. If you've heard that sound but it was flying in a woodland, it could be a natterer's bat. So visual clues are really important for a myotis bats. This is what Daubenton's bat looks like. Really different behavior, really different flight pattern. Also see quite clearly that it's got a big belly compared to its dorsal fur on its back. That's another really characteristic of the myotis bats. Our big bats are nocturnal. This one is flying fast out in the open, above the tree canopy, is flying. These guys can easily fly at 50 kilometers an hour. They're flying high above the trees, sending out really loud echolocation calls. When they get a signal that there's an insect, they'll take a steep swoop down, take the insect, and then carry on back up to their flight path above the trees. Big, long, narrow wings designed for fast flight in the open, not so maneuverable. These guys do have a peak frequency of about 19 kilohertz, so just within the range of some human hearing. This is what they sound like. So big bat, sort of chip chop sound. Sounds similar to a Lyser's bat, but the peak frequency will be different. Our serotyne, we don't have these here. These are like big pipistrelles, so similar kind of flight pattern to the pipistrelle, similar outline, but a much bigger bat. So where pipistrelles have a wingspan up to about 25, serotynes, I think they're up to about 35 centimeters wingspan. And so yeah, a much bigger bat, but looks very similar to the pipistrelle, the way it behaves and the shape of it. These peak frequency is about 26 kilohertz. Does sound similar to the noctule, but it's a bit more of a funky, syncopated rhythm to it. The noctule bat has quite a regular rhythm. Serotyne is a bit more of a funky rhythm. The rhythm of the call is related to the way it flies. So an erratic flight pattern creates a bit more of an erratic rhythm to the echolocation calls. Our Lyslers, similar to the noctule, it's a smaller cousin, so looks quite similar to the noctule, has a similar flight pattern. These guys will be above the canopy of the trees, but they'll be slightly shallower swoops when they come down to catch their prey. Again, similar outline to the noctule with quite long, narrow wings, but quite a lot smaller. So these guys have a wingspan up to about 35 centimeters. Yeah, and noctule's about 45, Lyser's about 35. And its peak frequency is 23. So sounds very similar to the noctule, but we can separate them out with different peak frequencies. This is a Lyser's bat in flight. So it's much bigger than the pipistrelle, and it's also much higher up in the sky. If you're there in person, you can see quite clearly sometimes the outline of the bat and the shape of the wings. That can be quite telling. Our brown long-eared bats, these guys are quite like butterflies the way they fly, quite buoyant flight, quite fluttery flight. These guys are capable of hovering. They tend to be within the woodlands as well, so they don't venture far out of the woodlands typically. They have big broad wings and these huge big characteristic ears. If you see a bat with big ears in Scotland, it's a brown long-eared bat. They do have a peak frequency that we can listen to. However, this is what they sound like. They're incredibly quiet, so you can easily miss them when you're out in the field. The bat detectors are also picking up background noise as well, so you could definitely mistake that for static. So yeah, if you see these bats, you can be pretty confident, but they're quite hard to hear. This is a brown long-eared bat in flight. This clip is taken from the BBC's Life of Mammals. So you can see how big, broad wings, really maneuverable flight, and those huge, big ears. Often we find brown long-eared bats because you might be walking through the woods and find a pile of moth wings on the ground. That might signify that you're standing underneath a brown long-eared bat feeding perch. So they like to sit in the trees and listen for their prey. They don't necessarily fly around echolocating like the other species. They just sit and listen for their prey, swoop down, grab it, fly back up to their branch and munch that moth and drop its wings on the floor beneath. So that's one of the ways we can find brown long-eared bats. When you're doing sunset survey, you're not just recording bats, you can record all the species that you find, and that data will also feed into national database. So some of the species that have been seen, there's badgers, sort of rabbits and hares. We'll have roe deer, red deer, hedgehogs, maybe pine marten if you're very lucky, foxes, Birds, owls, if you're into your insects, you can identify your insects as well. Yeah, so you're not just looking for bats, you can go out and record all the nocturnal wildlife that you see. It's really simple to enter your results online. You just basically need to put your name, your email address, the date that you did the survey, whether it was sunrise or sunset, how many people took part, did you see any bats, yes or no. You can have a go at identifying the species, but you don't need to. Bat is good enough. If you think it's a pipistrelle, but you don't know which one, you can put pipistrelle. What was the bat doing when you saw it? There's a drop-down menu. Most of those were probably going to be flying. And then how did you identify it? I saw it visually, or I had a bat detector. Then you need to provide a spatial reference, so either a grid reference, or you can just put a point on the map. There's an interactive map. And then you can also record all the other different species of animal that you record that you saw as well. As I say, our sunset surveys take place from April till October, and you can take part as few or as many times as you'd like. And your data will be used to produce population trends. And you can see here, the biggest grey section is common pipistrelle, but the next one is Pipistrelles species. So this is where people were unsure when they've just recorded pipistrelle, and that's absolutely fine. And this section here, the sort of bluey, light bluey one, that's just larger bat species. So that's where people were confident it wasn't a pipistrelle, but it was one of our big bats, but they don't know which one. So you don't have to know, you don't have to be confident, you just have to be honest. So as I say, we've got a few more workshops coming up that would be great to see you on, but I would definitely encourage you to get out and about and just start looking for bats yourself. There's no kind of substitute for practice, I can tell you that. If you want to sign up, please visit the Bat Conservation Trust website on www.bats.org.uk. If you are in one of our project areas, you're very welcome to get in touch with myself or your local project officer. Many of us are out bat monitoring throughout the summer, and there's often opportunities for the public to join us. So if you think you want to have a go, but you're not confident doing it yourself, reach out to someone, myself or one of your local officers, and join us and come and have a bit of a taster session yourself, see if you like it. But you can sign up yourself through the Bat Conservation Trust website, go into Our Work, drop-down menu, the National Bat Monitoring Programme. When you sign up, it asks you where you found out about the programme. If you could tick the species on the edge box, that'd be great. That just shows how we're contributing to bat conservation. Yeah, so that's pretty much it from that. Is there any more questions before we do a last week quiz?
Yes. So one question was around what kind of planting can encourage bats?
Okay, so a variety of plants. So the best way to encourage bats is to encourage a diversity of insects. So if you can plant plants with a range of flowering times, so increase your flowering season. So if you can have flowers blooming from spring right through to autumn, you're going to get a real diversity of insects. The Bat Conservation Trust website does have a leaflet, I think it's called Stars in the Night, which has some specific species that you can plant, which are great. So night flowering plants can be really good because they attract moths, which obviously some bats love to eat. But yeah, you just basically want a diversity. If you can have mature trees, shrubs, a variety of flowering plants, the more diverse your garden, the better it's going to be for biodiversity in general. But yeah, for more specific plants, I'm not very good with plants, I'm afraid, you will find that information on the Bat Conservation Trust website.
Okay, another question regarding whether data from iNaturalist will reach the Bat Conservation Trust.
I don't think it flows that way. So the sunset survey data goes through iRecord. I don't know if iRecord and iNaturalist are the same thing. So some of our data flows from iRecord into the MBMP. but not all of it. So I'm not sure about iNaturalist. For many of our surveys, the data goes directly to the Bat Conservation Trust, the National Bat Monitoring Programme, and then it'll make its way to other depositories afterwards. But the Sunset survey goes through iRecord. I'm not sure if that's the same as iNaturalist.
And one more question regarding bats and migration. You touched on that. The question was simply, do any bats migrate?
Yeah, well, we have one migratory species in the UK, the Nethusias pipistrelle. I'm not very good on bats globally, but I suspect there are quite a few migratory species. Claudia will probably know more about it than me, but certainly they do migrate. Some migrate sort of shorter distances, sort of seasonally, but some do some really long distance migrations, such as the Nethusias pipistrelle, which the females are, you know, some of them will be clocking up close to 5,000 kilometers a year for a tiny little bat. It's pretty impressive. I know that they do. They have the big radars that are tracking birds along the coast, migratory birds, and I think they're starting to incorporate technology to track bats as well. So I'm not sure how many migratory species of bat there are in the world. Maybe Cloudy knows, but I think there's probably a few.
I don't know the count for the world either.
Certainly, there are some migratory species, and they're traveling pretty long distances. So yeah.
That was it. No more questions in the chat at the moment.
Okay, let's have it. Next week quiz. I think this is our last week quiz as well. So see if you do as well this time as you did last. I'm a small bat found in most habitats, flying with lots of twists and turns, often just above your head height. What am I?
There's some answers coming in. I'll wait for a second. Yeah, it's all C's.
Oh, you guys are fabulous. You're all. Did someone say B?
No, all C's. There's more C's coming.
You're all very good. Yes, Pipistrelles. So yeah, depending on where you are in the country, could be common or soprano pipistrelle is more likely. I certainly record on Skye. I've recorded common pipistrelle everywhere I've looked. We've recorded soprano pipistrelles in about half of those locations. Down in Dumfries and Galloway, where my colleagues are, they record soprano pipistrelles more often than common pipistrelles. So it depends where you are in the country, but definitely pipistrelle. I'm a large bat with narrow wings flying high in the sky, swooping steeply for insects. What am I?
Okay, we've got the first entries. Wait one more second if there's more. It's all bees.
Well, pat on the back for all of you. Well done. Noctule. I'm a medium bat flying very low over water. What am I?
Yeah, there's answers coming in. And they're all A's.
Yeah, you guys are just wonderful. Well done. Daubenton's bat, the water bat. And that is it. That is it.